The first nationally distributed canned soda. That was RC Cola. The first Diet Cola to reach mainstream America. RC Cola. The first caffeine-free cola. The first blind taste tests. The first aluminum can. Every major innovation in the soft drink industry was pioneered by a company most Americans have forgotten. They didn't fail because the product was worse. Blind taste tests consistently showed consumers preferred RC. They didn't fail because the ideas were wrong. Coca-Cola and Pepsi copied every single one. They failed because in American business, being first and being best are not the same as being biggest. And the distance between those things is where this story lives. In the space between a pharmacist's basement in Georgia and a bottom shelf nobody looks at anymore. Next time you're in a grocery store, if you happen to find one that still carries it, look down. Not at eye level where the red and blue labels fight for your attention. Not even at waist height where the store brands live. Lower, all the way to the bottom shelf, where the fluorescent light barely reaches and the dust collects in the crevice between the metal rack and the floor. That's where you'll find RC Cola, if you find it at all. A squat row of cans, maybe a 2-liter bottle turned slightly sideways, tucked between generic club soda and a flavor of sparkling water nobody asked for. No end cap display, no promotional banner, no cooler door at the checkout. Just a quiet presence on the lowest rung, easy to miss and easier to walk past. It wasn't always this way. There was a time, not ancient history within living memory, when RC Cola commanded 1/10 of the entire American soft drink market. When grocery store managers in Greenville, South Carolina, were climbing into their cars and chasing down RC delivery trucks, not to complain, but to beg for more product, when the 4th best-selling soft drink in the United States carried the Royal Crown name. When Coca-Cola and Pepsi weren't copying each other, they were copying RC. The first nationally distributed canned soda, RC Cola. The first Diet Cola to reach mainstream America, RC Cola. The first caffeine-free cola, RC Cola. The first blind taste tests, 3 decades before Pepsi had the nerve to call it a challenge, RC Cola. Every major innovation in the soft drink industry, every single one, was pioneered by a company that started in a grocery basement in Columbus, Georgia, by a pharmacist who got into a pricing dispute over Coca-Cola syrup and decided he could do better. He could. That was never the problem. The problem was that doing better, being first, being right, none of it was enough. Not when your competitors had deeper pockets, stronger distribution, and the willingness to take everything you'd built and stamp their name on it. Today, RC Cola's share of the American soft drink market is below measurable levels. One researcher trying to track it admitted the number was so low he literally couldn't find it. The brand that changed everything got nothing in return. But in Columbus, Georgia, there's a museum in a restored 1946 warehouse on Hamilton Road, filled with the most comprehensive collection of RC Cola memorabilia in existence, recognized by the Smithsonian. And every June, 20,000 people descend on a Tennessee town of 500 to celebrate a cola and a snack cake that once meant something to people who worked for a living. This is the story of RC Cola, how it rose, what it built, and how 2 of the most powerful corporations in American history took it apart, not all at once, but piece by piece, innovation by innovation, shelf by shelf, until there was almost nothing left. Almost. Claude Adkins Hatcher was born on August 20th, 1876 in Quitman County, Georgia, deep in the rural southwest corner of the state, where the land flattened out toward the Chattahoochee and the summers pressed down like a hot towel. His father, Lucius, was a wholesale grocer. His mother was Eleanor Moore King. The young Hatcher originally intended to become a doctor, But somewhere along the way, he shifted course and graduated as a pharmacist from the University of Louisville School of Medicine. It's a detail worth pausing on. A pharmacist's training in that era wasn't just counting pills behind a counter. It was chemistry, formulation, understanding how substances interacted, how to mix, how to measure, how to create something from raw ingredients that did what you intended it to do. That training would prove decisive. But not yet. By 1901, Hatcher operated 2 pharmacies, one in Preston, Georgia, and another in Dawson, before selling both to join his father's grocery business in Columbus. Together, they formed the Cole-Hatcher-Hampton Grocery Company, later simplified to Hatcher Grocery Company, after buying out their partners around 1903. It was a solid business. Wholesale groceries in a growing southern city. Steady, respectable, unremarkable. Among the products the Hatcher Grocery Company purchased in bulk was Coca-Cola syrup, bought from a local bottler named Columbus Roberts. As a high-volume wholesale buyer, Hatcher believed he deserved what any large customer would expect: a volume discount, a commission, some form of pricing accommodation. He was, after all, helping Roberts move product. The Hatchers were essentially acting as unpaid distribution for Coca-Cola, delivering bottled drinks to their customers at cost as a loyalty perk, while paying full retail for the syrup. Roberts refused. No discount, no commission, no special terms. Contemporary accounts describe Hatcher as a quiet man, a scholar, mild-mannered, the kind of person you might underestimate. But beneath that composed exterior ran a streak of self-sufficiency so fierce that a pricing dispute over cola syrup would alter the course of American beverage history. Hatcher declared he had purchased his last case of soft drinks from Columbus Roberts. He would produce and bottle his own. As one Columbus historian later observed, basically, Asa Candler created his own competition. Hatcher retreated to the basement of his grocery company at 22 West 10th Street in Columbus and began experimenting with formulas, drawing on that pharmaceutical training, mixing, measuring, testing. His first creation was Royal Crown Ginger Ale, the genesis of a name that would endure for more than a century. The ginger ale sold well enough to convince father and son that they were onto something. In 1905, they reorganized their grocery business as Union Bottling Works. More flavors followed: Royal Crown Strawberry, Royal Crown Root Beer, a line of fruit drinks called Mellow, cream soda. The basement operation was becoming a real company. Then, around 1907, Hatcher developed the product that would define his ambition. He called it Chiro Cola, a cherry-flavored cola designed to compete directly with the drink he'd vowed never to buy again. It became the company's best seller almost immediately. By 1912, Hatcher renamed the entire operation the Chiro Cola Company and began franchising, selling concentrated syrup to independent bottlers who would mix, carbonate, bottle, and distribute the finished product under the Chiro Cola name. The franchise model was the engine. It allowed a small company in Columbus to project itself across the South without building bottling plants of its own. By 1920, 700 franchise bottling plants carried Chiro Cola across the South and Midwest. 700 from a grocery basement in less than 15 years. But Coca-Cola was watching. And Coca-Cola did not appreciate the word cola appearing on anyone else's bottle. In 1914, Hatcher filed to register Chiro Cola as a trademark. Coca-Cola's lawyers objected, demanding removal of the word cola from all advertising. The legal battle dragged on for nearly a decade. In 1923, the court sided with Coca-Cola. Hatcher tried abbreviating to just Chiro, but the name fell flat. The company pivoted, and the pivot, born from legal defeat, would produce something unexpected. In 1924, Hatcher introduced knee-high, a line of fruit-flavored sodas in orange, grape, peach, and root beer. The name, according to company lore, came from Hatcher overhearing a salesman describe a competitor's tall bottle as knee-high. Whether the story is true or not, Hatcher ran with it. Knee-high came in distinctive 12-inch tall glass bottles, twice the height of standard soda bottles, packed with bold, natural fruit flavors in an era dominated by cola. They were an instant sensation. Knee-high outsold Chero Cola entirely. Annual case production leapt from roughly 10,000 cases in 1924 to over 600,000 by 1928. The company was renamed Knee-high Corporation and listed on the New York Curb Exchange. Claude Hatcher, the quiet pharmacist who'd retreated to a basement over a syrup dispute, was now running a publicly traded beverage company, and then the world fell apart. The Great Depression hit the Knee-high Corporation like a freight train. Sales dropped from $3.7 million in 1929 to $1 million in 1930. Nearly every bottling plant in the franchise system bled red during 1931 and 1932. The only years in the company's history it ever lost money. Debts accumulated. Morale collapsed. And on New Year's Eve 1933, Claude Hatcher died. Suddenly, he was 57 years old. He was buried in Riverdale Cemetery in Muskogee County, Georgia. The company he'd built from a basement experiment was drowning in debt, reeling from the Depression, and now leaderless. His successor was H.R. Mott, the company's vice president of sales, a man who'd been with the firm since 1920. Mott moved with the kind of urgency that only a crisis can produce. He cut costs, discontinued slow sellers, consolidated production. Within a year, the company was debt-free. Then Mott made the decision that would define the next half-century of the company's existence. He called in Rufus Cam, the company chemist, reportedly on a Sunday, and told him to produce a good cola drink. Hatcher himself had started this project before his death, instructing Cam in 1932 to develop a new cola formula. Cam spent 6 months perfecting it. The concentrate was sent to selected bottlers for testing. A Knee-high bottler in Dothan, Alabama, tasted it and told Mott, "You've got something here." The reaction from other bottlers was unanimously positive. In 1934, Royal Crown Cola was released to the public, deliberately named to echo Hatcher's original 1905 creation. The full name was elegant, almost regal. The bottlers, being practical men, found it too long. Royal Crown became CRC, and RC it would stay. Between 1933 and 1940, annual sales increased tenfold. By 1940, RC products were available in 47 of 48 continental states. And in 1944, after 3 decades of legal warfare, courts finally ruled that the word cola was generic, not the exclusive property of Coca-Cola. The ruling was a vindication Claude Hatcher never lived to see. But something else was happening too. Something that went beyond sales figures and legal victories. RC Cola was becoming part of something larger. Something that had nothing to do with boardrooms and everything to do with the people who actually drank the stuff. No corporate marketing department planned it. No advertising agency dreamed it up. No contract was ever signed between the two companies. It just happened, the way real culture happens, from the ground up, among people solving a practical problem. The problem was lunch. If you were a coal miner in eastern Kentucky in the 1930s, or a cotton mill worker in Alabama, or a laborer in any of the thousands of small southern towns where the pay was thin and the work was brutal, you needed calories, cheap ones. A 10-cent lunch wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was the math of survival. An RC Cola cost a nickel. A moon pie cost a nickel. Together, you had something that passed for a meal, Sweet, dense, calorie-loaded fuel for men doing back-breaking physical work. Both products were larger than their competitors. RC came in generous portions. Moon pies, created at Chattanooga Bakery in 1917, ran about 4 inches across. Both were everywhere in the South. General stores, company stores near mines and mills, filling stations on 2-lane roads. Both were distinctly Southern. Moon pie from Chattanooga, Tennessee. RC Cola from Columbus, Georgia. Their distribution networks overlapped like they'd been designed to find each other. And so an RC Cola and a moon pie became more than a snack. It became a phrase, a shorthand, a badge of belonging for the working-class South, for people who didn't drink champagne and didn't pretend to, who found their pleasures where they could afford them and weren't ashamed of it. The phrase embedded itself in country music the way kudzu embeds itself in a Southern fence line, completely and permanently. Big Bill Lister, known as radio's tallest singing cowboy, recorded "Gimme an RC Cola and a Moon Pie" in 1951. NRBQ covered the theme in 1973, but the definitive version came in 1994, when Tracy Byrd sang "Lifestyles of the Not-So-Rich and Famous," a song that reached number 4 on the country charts, and delivered the lyric that said everything. Our champagne and caviar is an RC Cola and a moon pie. That's not a punchline. That's an identity. And it belonged to people who'd been told in 1,000 ways, large and small, that their tastes didn't matter. RC Cola heard them, or at least RC Cola was theirs, not because the company marketed itself that way, but because the people claimed it. The working man's cola. The one that wasn't Coke or Pepsi. The one that said quietly that what's good enough for other folks ain't good enough for me. To understand what RC Cola lost, you have to understand what it had. Start with the celebrity campaigns. In the 1940s, decades before Pepsi would make taste tests famous, RC Cola ran a revolutionary series of full-page color advertisements in the Saturday Evening Post and Good Housekeeping. These were the soft drink industry's first blind taste tests, and they featured a roster of Hollywood talent that seems almost absurd in retrospect. Joan Crawford, Bing Crosby, Bob Hope, Shirley Temple, Lucille Ball, Rita Hayworth, Betty Grable, Barbara Stanwyck, Hedy Lamarr, Claudette Colbert, Ginger Rogers, each one holding an RC, each one declaring it best. And in a twist that only real history could produce, Joan Crawford, who appeared in RC ads proclaiming "RC tastes best," later married Alfred Steele, the president of Pepsi Cola, and served on Pepsi's board of directors. You couldn't write that. Nobody would believe you. In 1966, before Kermit the Frog, before Miss Piggy, before any of it, Jim Henson created puppet characters for RC Cola ads, Sour Bird and Nutty Bird, with Frank Oz assisting. A year later, Nancy Sinatra appeared in RC commercials during her television special, singing about the one with the mad, mad taste. RC was the official sponsor of the New York Mets from the team's founding in 1962 through the early 1990s. Tom Seaver, Tom Terrific himself, appeared in RC commercials at Shea Stadium. For a generation of New York baseball fans, RC Cola and the Mets were inseparable. Then came the jingle. In the mid-1970s, RC launched the Me and My RC campaign, sung by country singer Louise Mandrell. It became one of the most infectious earworms of the decade, the kind of melody that lodged in your skull and stayed there for years. Me and my RC. 'Cause what's good enough for other folks ain't good enough for me and my RC. The commercials featured young, sun-drenched Americans skateboarding, hiking, swimming. The most famous spot, in 1978, showed Kelly Moran delivering pizza on a skateboard. RC even produced branded skateboards and released a vinyl album. The message was clear. RC wasn't for followers. It was for people who thought for themselves. But the cultural presence was only half the story. The other half was what was happening inside the laboratories and the bottling plants. The innovations that should have made RC Cola an empire. In 1954, RC Cola became the first beverage company to nationally distribute soft drinks in cans. Steel cans initially, lighter than glass, unbreakable, stackable, portable. It transformed how soda was sold, displayed, and consumed. RC later became the first to sell soft drinks in all aluminum cans. Around the early 1960s, every canned soda you've ever pulled from a cooler exists because RC proved it could work. In 1958, RC introduced the first 16-ounce bottle. More product for the customer at a time when competitors were still selling smaller portions. But the innovation that mattered most, the one that changed the entire industry and should have changed RC Cola's fortunes forever, was Diet Rite. Diet Rite Cola was developed as a sugar-free cola, sweetened with a blend of cyclamate and saccharin. Cyclamate was the key ingredient. It provided a taste far closer to real sugar than saccharin alone, which carried a metallic bitterness that most people noticed and many people hated. The combination produced something that tasted for the first time like a diet drink you might actually want to drink. RC began testing it regionally around 1954 to 1958 in markets including Chicago and Greenville, South Carolina. What happened in Greenville tells you everything about the product's potential. RC Cola had been running a distant third in Greenville, behind Coke, behind Pepsi, fighting for scraps. When Diet Rite hit the shelves, grocery store managers started getting into their cars and chasing down RC delivery trucks, not to return product, not to complain, to beg for more. They couldn't keep it in stock. When Diet Rite launched nationally in 1962, the results were explosive. Within 18 months, it rocketed to become the fourth best-selling soft drink in the entire United States, behind only Coca-Cola, Pepsi Cola, and regular RC Cola. The Los Angeles Times named it the leading new product of the 1960s. Diet Cola sales across the industry surged from 7.5 million cases in 1957 to over 50 million cases in 1962. One trade publication captured the moment. Diet Rite Cola's impact on the soft drink market was so stunning that its acceptance could be compared to the beginnings of Coca-Cola itself, some 75 years earlier. That's not hyperbole. That's what the numbers showed. RC Cola, the perpetual third-place finisher, had created an entirely new category of soft drink, and for a brief, brilliant window, it owned that category completely. Coca-Cola scrambled to launch Tab in 1963. Pepsi released Patio Diet Cola the same year, then rebranded it as Diet Pepsi in 1964. But even after the giants entered the market, Diet Rite held as large a share of the Diet Cola segment as Tab and Patio combined. To feel what this era meant, you have to step inside the places where it was actually made. A mid-century bottling plant was an assault on the senses. Noise levels exceeded 85 decibels in the bottling halls, equivalent to standing beside a running lawnmower. The dominant sound was the continuous clattering and rattling of glass bottles moving along metal conveyor chains, bottles marshaling together at filling stations, the rhythmic clinking as they jostled into single file. Layered over that was the hiss and whoosh of carbonation equipment injecting CO2 into the liquid, the mechanical thud of capping machines crimping crown caps onto bottles, the clatter of wooden crates being stacked by hand, and the constant whir of electric motors driving the conveyor belts. You couldn't hold a conversation without shouting. The dominant smell was sweet sugar syrup, a cloyingly sweet caramelized aroma drifting from the mixing areas where cola concentrate met simple syrup. Underneath it, the chemical-clean bite of caustic soda used to sterilize the glass bottles, a faint metallic tang from machinery lubricants, the yeasty sweet scent of active carbonation. The plants were hot. Bottle washing used scalding water and caustic solutions, throwing clouds of steam into the air. Carbonation equipment radiated heat. In a Georgia summer, and Columbus, Georgia, sits right on the fall line where the Piedmont meets the coastal plain, the kind of place where the humidity hangs on you like wet wool. Indoor temperatures could push past 100 degrees. Floors were perpetually slick from spilled soda, condensation, and conveyor lubricant. Workers wore white or light-colored uniforms with company patches, caps, or hairnets, rubber-soled shoes on the wet concrete. And through that heat and noise and steam, the bottles kept moving, washed, filled, capped, crated, loaded. You could watch the machine turn a bottle upside down to mix the contents, creating soda as if by magic, before it continued its journey along the belt, sealed with a cap, whipped off the line by hand, and into a crate. Truck after truck pulling out of the loading bay, case after case of RC Cola, heading for grocery stores, gas stations, diners, and general stores across the South. Columbus itself was a city built on water and labor. The Chattahoochee River drops 125 feet within 2.5 miles at Columbus, and that water power had made it one of the South's earliest and largest mill towns. Textile mills lining the riverbanks since before the Civil War. Mill workers living in company villages, children serving as dinner toters, carrying lunches to parents on the factory floor. Fort Benning, the nation's largest infantry training post, shaped the city's economy alongside the mills. Columbus was simultaneously a mill town, a military town, and a soft drink town. And in a historical irony that borders on the absurd, Columbus was also the birthplace of Dr. John Pemberton, who lived there from 1855 to 1869 before moving to Atlanta and inventing Coca-Cola. The same city, the same river, two colas. One would become the most recognized brand on earth. The other would invent everything that brand profited from. By the late 1960s, the combined strength of regular RC Cola and Diet Rite gave the company approximately 10% of the American soft drink market. 10% doesn't sound like much until you remember that this was a market dominated by two of the most powerful corporations in the history of American business. 10% against Coke and Pepsi was a miracle. Diet Rite was the dominant diet cola in America. RC was a genuine third force in the cola wars, not merely surviving, but innovating faster than either rival. New bottling plants were being built across the franchise system. Production equipment was being modernized. The company's financials were healthy. By the early 1980s, the soft drink division alone would generate $242 million of the company's total $490 million in sales. Beverage historian Tristan Donovan captured the feeling inside the company. RC had the dominant Diet Cola brand, and that was a very big deal. For RC, there was this sense of, finally, we've broken through. Finally. After decades as the underdog, after Claude Hatcher's death, the Depression, the trademark wars, the franchise grind, after being outspent, outmuscled, and overlooked at every turn, RC Cola had found something the giants didn't have, built a market they hadn't imagined, and for one shining moment, it looked like the pharmacist's basement experiment might actually win. In April 1980, RC would do it again, launching RC 100, the first nationally distributed caffeine-free cola, beating Pepsi-free by 2.5 years, and caffeine-free Coca-Cola by 3. 3 million cases sold in the first year, 18 million the next. Projections called for 40 million in 1982. The innovation ledger is almost painful to read in hindsight. First canned soda. First Diet Cola. First 16-ounce bottle. First caffeine-free cola. First blind taste tests. First all-aluminum can. First, Diet Cherry Cola. First diet soda sweetened with Splenda. Every single time. First. As RC executive James W. Harrelson said, in a sentence that carries the weight of the entire story, "We led in every innovation." I'm saying that with pride, but also with sadness, because Coke and Pepsi would come in and take over. Pride and sadness. That's the whole history of RC Cola in 5 words. This was the summit, the absolute peak. And standing at that height, with Diet Rite dominating, RC 100 flying off shelves, the jingle still ringing in people's ears, nobody inside the company could see what was coming. 3 blows were about to land, one after another, and when the last one fell, the RC Cola that America knew would be gone. The decisions that would unravel everything were already being made, some by bureaucrats, some by raiders, some by the 2 corporations that had spent 50 years watching RC innovate, and 50 years proving that in America, being first means nothing if someone bigger is standing right behind you, ready to take what you built. To understand how RC Cola fell, you have to understand cyclamate. Cyclamate was an artificial sweetener, and it was the secret behind Diet Rite's success. On its own, saccharin, the other zero-calorie sweetener available at the time, left a metallic aftertaste that most people could detect and many people despised. It was the reason diet drinks had always tasted like diet drinks, a chemical approximation of sweetness that reminded you with every sip of what you were missing. Cyclamate changed that. Blended with saccharin, it produced a sweetness profile far closer to actual sugar. Diet Rite didn't taste like a compromise. It tasted like cola. That was the breakthrough. That was why grocery managers in Greenville chased down delivery trucks. That was why Diet Rite outsold Tab and Patio combined. The product was simply better, and cyclamate was the reason. Every diet soda on the market used cyclamate. Tab used it. Diet Pepsi used it. Fresca used it. Diet Rite used it. The entire diet category, the category RC Cola had created, rested on a single ingredient. On October 18, 1969, Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, Robert Finch announced that cyclamate would be banned. Studies had linked it to bladder cancer in laboratory rats. The research was funded in part by the sugar industry, which had contributed $600,000, according to beverage historian Tristan Donovan. The rats had been given doses equivalent to drinking more than 500 diet sodas per day. The science is now widely considered flawed, but the FDA acted, and the damage was immediate. The entire diet soda market collapsed. Diet drinks had accounted for roughly 20% of all soda sales. After the ban, that number fell below 3%. The floor dropped out from under the whole category. But the floor didn't drop equally. For Coca-Cola, Tab was one product in an enormous portfolio. For PepsiCo, Diet Pepsi was a side venture alongside the core brand. Neither company depended on Diet Cola the way RC did. Diet Rite wasn't a supporting player in Royal Crown's lineup. It was the star. It was the product that had lifted the company from perennial also-ran to genuine contender. It was the reason RC had 10% of the market, and overnight, it was crippled. RC's market share plummeted. From roughly 10% around 1970, it fell to approximately 4% by 1973. Coca-Cola and Pepsi had the marketing budgets, the distribution networks, and the brand equity to rebuild their diet lines with reformulated products. RC didn't. As James Harrelson later said, it took almost 12 years to recover from that. 12 years. And RC never did fully recover, because while the company was reeling from the cyclamate ban, its leadership made a decision that seemed prudent at the time and looks catastrophic in hindsight. They diversified. Panicked by the collapse of the Diet Cola market, Royal Crown's management went looking for stability outside the beverage industry. The logic was understandable. If a single government ruling could obliterate your most profitable product line, perhaps the smart move was to spread your risk, not to depend so heavily on soft drinks, to build a portfolio. In the early 1970s, the company acquired 2 fruit juice companies, then 7 home furnishing companies, manufacturers of mirrors, picture frames, floor tiles, and cabinets. By the mid-1970s, nearly a quarter of Royal Crown's total business was tied up in home furnishings. The company that had invented Diet Cola was now in the picture frame business. Then, in 1976, they bought Arby's for $18 million. The company name was changed to Royal Crown Companies, Incorporated, a name that told you everything. It wasn't a cola company anymore. It was a holding company that happened to own a cola brand. There's a pattern in American business that repeats itself so often it should be etched in stone somewhere. A company faces a crisis in its core product. Instead of pouring everything into fixing the problem, it diversifies, spreading resources thinner across businesses it doesn't understand, starving the brand that built the company in the first place. The diversification doesn't solve the crisis. It compounds it. And by the time the leadership realizes the mistake, the core brand has lost the momentum, the shelf space, and the consumer loyalty that took decades to build. RC Cola was being neglected, not out of malice, out of fear. The cyclamate ban had shaken the company's confidence in its own industry. And while Royal Crown was busy selling picture frames and roast beef sandwiches, Coca-Cola and Pepsi were doing something far more consequential. They were buying the shelves. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Coca-Cola and Pepsi transformed the American retail landscape in a way that had nothing to do with taste and everything to do with power. Both companies began consolidating their bottling operations into mega bottlers, enormous, well-capitalized distribution networks that could deliver product to every retail outlet in a region with ruthless efficiency. Then they started paying slotting fees, cash payments to grocery chains, convenience stores, and gas stations in exchange for preferential or exclusive shelf space, eye-level placement, end-cap displays, cooler doors at checkout, the real estate inside a store that determines what consumers see, reach for, and buy. RC Cola's distribution system was the opposite of this. From the very beginning, from Claude Hatcher's franchise model in 1912, RC had relied on small, independent bottlers. That network had been the company's greatest asset in the early decades, allowing it to expand rapidly without the capital expense of building its own plants. But by the 1980s, that same network had become a structural weakness so severe that no amount of innovation could overcome it. RC's bottlers were, by definition, the ones that Coca-Cola and Pepsi hadn't chosen. They were smaller. They were less capitalized. Many of them carried competing products alongside RC, creating divided loyalties. A 1983 court case illustrated the problem with painful clarity. An RC bottler in New York was simultaneously planning to distribute a competing caffeine-free cola, and RC was forced to sue its own bottler to protect its brand. When you can't even count on your own distribution network, you're not competing, you're surviving. Tristan Donovan captured the dynamic. They started carving up the retail market and shutting RC out in the process. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was capitalism. Coca-Cola and Pepsi had the resources to buy access to consumers. RC didn't. And in a retail environment where shelf space is finite and consumer attention is measured in seconds, being absent from the shelf is the same as being absent from the market. The effects were devastating and self-reinforcing. Less shelf space meant fewer sales. Fewer sales meant less revenue. Less revenue meant less money for marketing. Less marketing meant less consumer demand. Less demand gave retailers even less reason to stock the product. The spiral fed on itself, and once it started, it was nearly impossible to reverse. RC Cola, the brand that had pioneered canned soda, Diet Cola, caffeine-free cola, and blind taste tests, was being physically removed from the places where Americans bought soft drinks. Not because consumers didn't want it, because they couldn't find it. And then, at the worst possible moment, a predator arrived. Victor Posner was born September 18, 1918, in Baltimore, the son of Russian Jewish grocers. He dropped out of school at 13. By his 40s, he had built a fortune through leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers, the financial maneuvers of the 1980s that turned companies into assets to be stripped rather than institutions to be built. At his peak, Posner controlled more than 40 public companies and drew personal compensation exceeding $10 million a year. He was known for acquiring businesses, cutting costs to the bone, redirecting profits into insider-controlled real estate, and moving on. In 1984, Posner acquired Royal Crown Companies through his subsidiary Chesapeake Financial Corporation. The corporate headquarters was moved from Columbus to Miami Beach, and for the next 9 years, RC Cola was run, to the extent it was run at all, as a cash extraction operation. The first thing to go was the marketing budget. Consider the arithmetic of the Cola Wars in 1985. Coca-Cola spent roughly $80 million on advertising in the United States. Pepsi spent approximately $60 million. These were campaigns that featured Michael Jackson, Bill Cosby, and production values rivaling Hollywood films. The Cola Wars were the most expensive marketing battle in American history, and they were being fought on every television screen, every billboard, and every magazine page in the country. RC Cola's advertising budget was approximately $10 million, and Posner was cutting even that. $10 million against a combined $140 million. It's not a competition. It's an execution. Under Posner, RC's market share fell from roughly 4% to 2.5% by the mid-1980s. The brand was fading from American consciousness at the precise moment when Coca-Cola and Pepsi were saturating it. Every Super Bowl ad, every celebrity endorsement, every taste test challenge reinforced the idea that the cola market had exactly two contestants. RC wasn't losing the war. It was being erased from the map. There were people inside the company who fought. James Harrelson, working under Posner's regime, managed to launch Cherry RC, Diet RC, and a reformulated Diet Rite line. These were credible products, but launching new products without a marketing budget is like whispering in a hurricane. Nobody hears you. Harrelson later said something that carries the weight of a man who'd spent years pushing a boulder uphill. Nobody had the guts to stand our ground. If we'd have hung in there, we'd be in much better shape. Posner's empire eventually collapsed under its own contradictions. Shareholders of DWG Corporation, Posner's holding company, sued, charging that Posner and his son Stephen had drained its assets to line their own pockets. In 1992, Posner agreed to pay $10.7 million in settlement and resigned. In 1993, a federal judge barred Posner and his son from ever running any public company again. He also pleaded guilty to tax evasion. Posner died on February 11, 2002. By the time he was gone, the damage to RC Cola was structural. 9 years of starvation had hollowed out the brand's market presence, its relationship with bottlers, its visibility to consumers, and its institutional knowledge. You can rebuild a marketing budget. You can reformulate a product. But you cannot easily rebuild a presence in the American consumer's mind once it's been allowed to go dark for nearly a decade. The pharmacist's company, the one that had invented the future of soft drinks, was now a shell. Step back for a moment and look at the pattern whole. In 1940, RC Cola pioneered blind taste tests, the revolutionary idea that if you removed the label, consumers could judge a product on what it actually tasted like. Pepsi didn't launch its famous Pepsi Challenge until 1975. 35 years later, the same concept, repackaged with a bigger budget and a catchier name. Pepsi got the credit. RC got nothing. In 1954, RC nationally distributed the first canned soda. Within a few years, canned Coke and Pepsi were everywhere. The innovation that transformed how Americans bought and consumed soft drinks was RC's. The profits were Coca-Cola's and Pepsi's. In 1962, RC created the Diet Cola category with Diet Rite. Coca-Cola responded with Tab in 1963. Pepsi followed with Diet Pepsi in 1964. By 1982, Coca-Cola launched Diet Coke, which became the dominant Diet Cola and remains so today. A market that RC invented, a market worth billions of dollars, was claimed by the very companies that had scrambled to catch up. In 1980, RC launched the first caffeine-free cola. Pepsi waited 2.5 years, then released Pepsi Free in October 1982. Marketed with breathtaking audacity as the first major brand caffeine-free cola. The first major brand. As though RC, which had been selling cola in America for nearly 50 years, simply didn't count. Coca-Cola followed with caffeine-free Coca-Cola in 1983. The category RC created was absorbed into someone else's portfolio. Every time. The same script. RC identifies a consumer need nobody else has addressed. RC develops a product to meet that need. RC proves the market exists. And then, Coca-Cola and Pepsi walk through the door that RC opened, carrying marketing budgets and distribution networks that make RC's efforts invisible. An analyst at Montgomery Securities named Emmanuel Goldman summarized it with the clinical precision of someone reading a death certificate. RC simply doesn't have the economy of scale or marketing funds available to increase that market share. Economy of scale. Marketing funds. The polite way of saying that in American capitalism, the best product doesn't win. The best funded product wins. And RC Cola was never at any point in its history the best funded anything. The tragedy isn't that RC was worse. Blind taste tests consistently showed consumers preferred RC. The tragedy is that being better didn't matter, not when Coca-Cola could spend $4 to $5 billion globally on marketing, not when Pepsi could buy a Super Bowl halftime show, not when both companies could pay retailers to physically remove your product from the shelf and replace it with theirs. RC Cola didn't lose the cola wars. It was outspent, outmuscled, outpositioned, and then the final insult written out of the history. After Posner, RC Cola passed through a revolving door of corporate owners. Each acquisition diluted the brand a little further. Each new parent company had its own priorities, and RC was never at the top of anyone's list. Nelson Peltz and Peter May's Triarch companies took over in 1993, and to their credit, they tried. Triarch injected roughly $25 million a year into RC's marketing, a meaningful increase over the starvation rations of the Posner era, but still a fraction of what Coca-Cola spent on a single product launch. They developed Royal Crown Draft Cola, a premium cola made with pure cane sugar, positioned as the thinking person's soda. It was a good product. The weakened bottler network couldn't get it onto shelves. It was discontinued within a year. In 1997, The Onion, the satirical newspaper with a gift for finding the precise nerve, ran a headline that said more about RC Cola's trajectory than any business analysis. RC Cola celebrates 10th purchase. In 2000, Cadbury Schweppes acquired Royal Crown as part of a $1.45 billion purchase of Triarch's beverage business. RC became a small piece of a vast portfolio alongside Dr. Pepper and 7-Up. The following year, all non-U.S. RC businesses were sold to Cott Beverages of Canada, an early sign that the company's future, if it had one, might not be American. Dr. Pepper Snapple Group inherited RC when Cadbury spun off its American beverage operations in 2008. Then, in 2018, Keurig Green Mountain acquired Dr. Pepper Snapple for $18.7 billion, creating Keurig Dr. Pepper. RC Cola was now one brand among dozens in a portfolio dominated by Dr. Pepper, 7-Up, Snapple, and A&W. Through it all, the numbers told the story of a brand being slowly erased. At its peak around 1970, RC held approximately 10% of the market. By 1973, after the cyclamate ban, it was 4%. By the mid-1980s, under Posner, 2.5%. By 1990, with Coca-Cola holding 40.2% and Pepsi holding 31.5%, RC clung to roughly 2.8%. By 1999, Ad Age reported RC's share had collapsed to 0.3%, effectively a rounding error. By the 2020s, it was below measurable levels. That's what erasure looks like. Not a sudden disappearance, a long fade. A brand that once commanded 1/10 of the American soda market, slowly losing shelf space, losing visibility, losing the casual awareness that keeps a product alive in a consumer's mind. Year after year, a little less present, a little harder to find, a little easier to forget, until one day you're on the bottom shelf and even that feels generous. And yet, RC Cola didn't vanish, not entirely, not in the ways that matter most. In Bell Buckle, Tennessee, a town of roughly 500 people, approximately 20,000 visitors arrive every year on the third Saturday in June for the RC Cola and Moon Pie Festival. They've been coming since the mid-1990s. The 2025 edition marked the 30th anniversary. There's a certified 10-mile run, a moon pie toss, the crowning of the RC Cola King and Moon Pie Queen, a parade, live music, and the grand finale, the cutting of the world's largest moon pie, offered free to everyone. It's tongue-in-cheek, it's self-aware, it's proudly kitschy, and 20,000 people show up for it in a town with one stoplight. Because the thing it celebrates, that nickel lunch, that working-class badge, that pairing of two Southern products that found each other on the shelves of general stores during the Depression, still means something to people. Something no marketing budget can manufacture and no corporate acquisition can kill. In Columbus, Georgia, the Hatcher Family Cola Museum sits in a restored 1946 warehouse on Hamilton Road, part of the Columbus Collective Museums. Owner Alan Woodall calls it the most comprehensive RC Cola collection in existence. The Smithsonian has recognized it. Inside those walls, the whole arc is preserved. The ginger ale bottles, the knee-high signs, the Diet Rite cans, the celebrity endorsements, the Me and My RC memorabilia. The physical evidence of a company that changed an industry and got nothing in return. Historic Columbus operates a soft drink heritage trail. 7 markers through uptown Columbus documenting the history of knee-high, RC Cola, and the Coca-Cola connection. A historical marker stands at the 10th Street site where Claude Hatcher mixed his first formulas in the basement of a grocery company, driven by a dispute over syrup pricing that he refused to tolerate. And overseas, in what may be the strangest chapter of RC Cola's long, strange story, the brand thrives. In the Philippines, RC Cola is the 3rd largest cola brand. In 2020, a surreal advertisement called Basta, featuring a boy with drinking glasses growing from his back and a mother whose head is an RC Cola bottle, went massively viral. 51 million views, 300 to 66,000 shares. Featured on Ellen. A bronze lion at Cannes. Sales jumped 67%. It proved something that RC's American executives had never had the budget to demonstrate, that a brand can compete on creativity when it can't compete on spending. In Tajikistan, the poorest country in the former Soviet Union, RC Cola appears to dominate the cola market entirely. A local partner began bottling RC in 2000, 14 years before the first Coca-Cola plant opened there. In the chaos of the post-Soviet 1990s, RC's international team struck a deal that gave them first-mover advantage in a market nobody else was paying attention to. RC's local Instagram following dwarfs Coca-Cola's. In Israel, RC is reportedly the second largest cola brand, ahead of Pepsi. The brand has presence in Estonia, Latvia, the UK, Cyprus, Thailand, New Zealand, Australia, and India. Products are sold in 65 countries through over 100 bottler partnerships with more than 2 million points of sale globally. The international business is now owned by Philippine-based Mackay Holdings, which acquired RC Global Beverages for approximately $47 million in January 2023. And in late 2025, something happened that hadn't happened in 40 years. Keurig Dr. Pepper launched a new RC Cola advertising campaign starting in Chicago, a city where RC had been woven into pizza culture for decades, where a liter of RC reportedly came free with every pizza order. The tagline, "Not a soft drink, just a damn good cola." A new RC Cola Zero Sugar variant launched alongside it. The campaign targets what KDP calls the loud and prouds, the loyal, outspoken RC drinkers who never left. The classic packaging was deliberately retained. They know what they have. They know that the people who love RC don't love it despite its underdog status. They love it because of it. Here is what RC Cola's story means, though we'll resist the urge to say it plainly, because you already know. A pharmacist got angry about a syrup price in a basement in Columbus, Georgia, and built a company that changed how Americans drink. He created the franchise bottling model that projected his products across the South. He died before he could see his chemist's finest work, a cola formula that would carry his name for nearly a century. That cola pioneered every major innovation in its industry. Canned soda, Diet Cola, caffeine-free cola, blind taste tests, aluminum cans. Every time RC proved the concept, every time someone with more money proved they could take it, the cyclamate ban gutted the product that should have been RC's ticket to the top tier. The diversification into picture frames and roast beef sandwiches bled focus from the core brand. A corporate raider starved the company of marketing dollars during the most expensive advertising war in American history. And through it all, the two largest beverage companies on earth were systematically purchasing the shelf space that RC needed to survive. Being first wasn't enough. Being better wasn't enough. Being right about Diet Cola, about caffeine-free cola, about canned soda, about giving consumers what they wanted before anyone else even thought to ask. None of it was enough. RC Cola executive James Harrelson said it best, and it's worth hearing one more time. We led in every innovation. I'm saying that with pride, but also with sadness, because Coke and Pepsi would come in and take over. Pride and sadness, the two things that live side by side in every part of this story. Pride in what was built, sadness for what it earned. Next time you're in a grocery store, look down, past the eye-level real estate that Coca-Cola and Pepsi paid for, past the mid-shelf brands, down to the bottom where the light doesn't quite reach. If you find it, that familiar red and blue label sitting quietly on the lowest shelf, pick it up, open it, Take a drink. It's a good cola. It always was. That was never the problem.